in Jaguar. We're going to start the second section, Manius. And we're going to go to chapter 4 on page 35. I landed in Brasilia late Saturday evening in the crowded terminal. Sweaty people pushed and shouted in Portuguese, which I didn't understand a word of. Peter had booked a room for me at a hotel right next to the airport. I checked in, went up to my room, turned the television on, and fell asleep watching an episode of Star Trek in Portuguese. The next morning I ate breakfast, then went back to the airport and waited for my flight, which left at noon. When I stepped off the airplane in Manius, the blast of heat nearly knocked me over. Breathing the air was like inhaling steam. By the time I walked the short distance to the terminal building, I was drenched in sweat. A mass of people waited inside, holding up a crudely drawn sign with last names printed on them. I tried to pick my father out of the crowd, but I didn't see him. I was just about ready to break through the throng and look for him in another part of the airport when I saw a sign that said Lanza. It was held by a man I had never seen before. He was tall, very thin, and completely bald. He wore wraparound sunglasses, a purple tank top, shorts, and sandals, and carried an old crumpled hat in his hand. On his left shoulder was a tattoo of a large blue butterfly. I read the sign again to make sure, then walked over to him slowly. "Are you Jake?" he shouted above the noise. I nodded. "Follow me." He turned around and started to wend his way through the crowd. I wasn't sure if I should follow him or not. I turned around and looked for my father again. No luck. When I turned back, the skeleton with glasses was waving impatiently for me to come with him. I followed at a safe distance behind. When we got outside of the terminal, he stopped and put his old battered hat, which looked as if he had done a headstand in a chicken coop while he was wearing it. "My name's Buzz Lindbergh," he said, sticking out a hand embedded with years of black grease as permanent as a tattoo on his shoulder. I shook it, then asked him where my father was. He couldn't make it. He and Bill had to go downriver and pick up the boat. I expect they'll be back sometime tomorrow. Hearing Bill's name made me feel a little better. Buzz was obviously connected with the Jaguar Preserve in some way. "The limo is over here." He saw my hesitancy and smiled. "I don't blame you for being a little leery. I don't think I would go with me if I didn't know me. Let's see how I can fix this up." He thought a minute, then continued. "Bill Brewster and your father have been friends since they were at college together. Your grandfather is named Tawpoo. He's Hopi Indian. He lives in a retirement home in Poughkeepsie, New York. You've been staying there since Doc came down here. You were with your father in Kenya last year, when you got back, you started taking flying lessons. Okay, I interrupted. I'm convinced. Good. It's time to go to the warehouse. Warehouse? You'll see. He led me over to an old truck that didn't have a square inch of good metal on it. It was so rusty that the roof over the cab had corroded away, making a permanent sunroof. "This is the limo?" "Yep." There were 2 boys sitting in what was left of the bed. Buzz pulled a couple of loose bills out of his pocket and handed it to each boy. They grabbed them and ran away. "Mananas rule number 1, Buzz said. Never leave anything you want to see again without a guard. 2 guards if you can afford them. It's part of the economy down here. Kind of like insurance up in the States. Hop in." Hopping in was easy. There was no door on the passenger side. I climbed up and sat down. Something sharp poked me. I jumped up and heard my pants tear. "Sorry about that," Buzz said. "I should have warned you." He grabbed a clipboard off the dash and put it over the exposed spring. I sat back down, hoping I wouldn't get tetanus from the wound on my butt. Buzz stomped on the gas pedal a few times as if he were trying to squash a scorpion. "No key," he explained, reaching under the dash and sparking 2 wires together. The engine coughed, sputtered, then blew out a plume of thick black smoke. "No muffler either," he shouted above the racket. We lurched forward and passed a cheerful sign that said, "Welcome to Manius," in several languages. There was no point in trying to talk to Buzz above the noise, so I held on and tried to remember some of the things I had read about Manius while I was at the home. Manius is 600 miles inland from the east coast of Brazil. It sits on the shore of the Rio Negro, close to where the Rio Solimões and Rio Negro joined to form the Amazon River. The city was established by Portuguese colonists in the 1600s and was named after a tribe of Indians that lived in the region. In 1839, Charles Goodyear discovered a way to turn the sap from rubber trees into rubber tires. This discovery turned Manius into a thriving city in the middle of the jungle. The plantation owners, rubber traders, and bankers got rich from rubber exports and built palaces with their newfound wealth. They also built a beautiful opera house in the center of the city, and stars from all over the world traveled up to the Amazon to perform there. It was said that some of the people in Manius were so rich, they sent their dirty clothes to Europe to be laundered. This prosperity didn't last long. The British came in and managed to smuggle rubber tree seedlings back to England. They cultivated the trees and transported thousands of them to Ceylon and Malaysia and set up plantations of their own. The competition caused the rubber market to crash in Manius, and people stopped sending their laundry to Europe. Manius had been struggling ever since. The first thing that surprised me about Manius was the terrible air pollution. A visible haze of wood smoke and diesel fumes hung like fog in the humid air. My eyes watered as Buzz drove the gauntlet through the heavy traffic. The streets of the city were packed with cars and motorcycles. The sidewalks were filled with people moving sluggishly through the late afternoon heat. Buzz drove down to the waterfront as we passed a huge marketplace. Gangs of children wearing ragged t-shirts and shorts ran next to the truck with their hands out, begging for money. Dozens of black vultures perched on roofs and trees surrounding the market, waiting for food to drop on the ground. We stopped at a chain-linked gate, and Buzz jumped out and opened it. He drove through and stopped again. "I'll get it," I told him, and closed the gate behind us. He drove down a gravel road and stopped in front of a large warehouse, which had more rust on it than the truck he was driving. "Home, sweet home," he said. A man in filthy clothes sat in a chair, leaning against the warehouse. He had an old side-by-side shotgun cradled in his arms. Buzz said something to him in Portuguese and gave him some money. The man glanced at me through bloodshot, unfriendly eyes, then walked away in the direction we had come. "Another guard?" Buzz nodded and slid open a wide drive-through door. I stepped inside and staggered backward. The warehouse was hot enough to cook a pizza in, and it smelled like rotting fruit. "I'll open the other side and we'll get some breeze going." Buzz disappeared into the dark interior, and a moment later a crack of a broadening light appeared at the far end. I walked further into the warehouse, but stopped when something plopped on my head. I reached up to wipe it away, and my hand was smeared with smelly slime. "What the—" "Can't you hear them?" "Hear what?" "The bats," Buzz shouted. "They're echolocating off of the metal walls." I listened and heard high-pitched pinging sounds echoing through the warehouse. The floor was covered with sticky bat gungo. I glanced up, but it was too dark to see any bats in. "I should have warned you," Buzz said. "You need to wear a hat in here." He opened a door along one of the walls and flipped a light on. "It's safe in our office." On the way over, I got hit twice more. "Wipe your feet before you come in," Buzz pointed to a mat outside the door. "How many bats are up there?" "You tell me." Buzz turned a flashlight on and shone it at the ceiling. I looked up and my mouth fell open. I closed it quickly so something unpleasant wouldn't fall in. Every inch of the roof was covered with squirming little bats. There had to be thousands of them. "Fruit bats," Buzz said. "We got a heck of a deal on the place." "I bet." "Come on in." I stepped inside air conditioning. It was probably 75 degrees in there, but it felt like the Arctic compared to the warehouse. All the comforts of home, Buzz said. I looked around. Along one wall were 2 sets of bunk beds. On the opposite wall, there was a small kitchen with a sink, refrigerator, and stove. We do most of our work in here. Good idea. I'll show you the rest of the place. He opened a door near the sink and led me down a short hallway to a room about the same size. Satellite photos and maps of the Amazon basin covered one of the walls. There were several workbenches with tools and radio telemetry gear to track animals. Buzz opened another door and showed me the bathroom. You might want to get cleaned up and change your pants. I'd forgotten about the tear in my pants. I felt back there and found that the rip was bigger than I thought. Yeah, I said, good idea. I was irritated that Doc hadn't met me at the airport. He should have at least called and prepared me for Buzz. The only excuse I could think of was that there wasn't a phone nearby, or perhaps he had left town right after he sent me the fax at the home. I felt somewhat better after taking a shower and changing my clothes. I stopped in the map room and took a closer look at the gear in the maps. One of the maps had a large area marked in red. I assumed this was the Jaguar Preserve. It was a long way from Manius. Buzz said Doc and Bill were bringing a boat upriver. This probably meant they hadn't been to the preserve yet, which meant that Doc had been in Manius for the past 7 weeks, which meant that he could have called me if he wanted to. I walked into the bunk room and asked Buzz what was going on, but he wasn't there. I did find a phone and a fax machine, though. I picked up the receiver. There was a dial tone. Doc could have easily called or faxed me. I started to get irritated again. There was a window in the door leading to the warehouse. I cupped my hands and around my eyes and looked out. It was too dark to see anything clearly. All I could see were piles covered with plastic tarps to protect them from the rain of bat gungo. I waited for about 10 minutes, then decided to find Buzz. Before I left, I put on my baseball cap. The smell in the warehouse wasn't as sour as before, and the temperature had dropped by at least 10 degrees. I walked out the back door. About 50 feet away, there was a boat dock sticking out into the Rio Negro. The river had to be half a mile across at this point. The murky gray water flowed slowly. On the other side was a line of green tropical vegetation. I walked around to the front of the warehouse. No sign of Buzz, and the truck was gone. I walked back around to the dock, then went inside to escape the heat. I found some paper and wrote a dispatch to the home. There wasn't much to say aside from the fact that I had arrived safely. Manius was filthy, Doc and Bill were bringing a boat upriver, and the heat was unbelievable. When I finished, I slipped the sheet into the machine and dialed the home's fax number. The dispatch was on its way. Why hadn't Doc done the same for me? An hour later, I heard the truck pull up. A few minutes later, Buzz came in with both arms full of groceries. I got off the bunk and gave him a hand. Dinner, he said, but before we eat, you need to come outside. He looked at his watch. We only have a couple of minutes. Don't forget your hat. I followed Buzz outside and down to the dock. The sun was setting, and it started to cool down some. Buzz kept glancing at his watch and then the warehouse. What are we doing? 5 seconds. What do you mean? 5 now! Thousands of bats poured out through the warehouse door. The noisy black cloud flew right over us and headed across the Rio Negro. It took at least 3 minutes for the warehouse to empty. There will be a few stragglers, Buzz said, but that about does it. They'll be back early tomorrow morning. You don't want to be in that warehouse when they leave, or You don't want to be in the warehouse when they leave or come back to roost. Your dad says they go out every night to fill up on fruit. Someday, I'm going to design an ultralight model like a bat. What's an ultralight? I'll show you tomorrow. Let's go in and fix some grub.